I told the admiral, continued he, that I hoped that the Prince Regent would know the treatment which I receive here. Admiral said that if I thought myself aggrieved, I ought to complain either to the Regent or to the ministers. I think it would be a degradation to me to complain to ministers who have treated me so ill, and who act from hatred. The admiral strove to excuse the governor, and declared that he knew it was the intention of the English government to treat me well, and that there must be some mistake or misconception which would be rectified. I told him that you English were great egoists, very fond of excusing each other and of praising your country and yourselves, but that to strangers everything was justifiable. I spoke to him about the detention of the French prisoners and the reception of the prisoners who had broken their parole, of which I had been accused. I explained that the English were the first to begin. Here Napoleon gave an explanation similar to that which appears in a preceding part of the work. I then published in the Moniteur the names of several English who had violated their parole and escaped before any Frenchman had done the same. For it was much easier to escape in France than in England, as the English prisoners were allowed great liberty and much more space than the French were in England. But the fact is that your ministers hate me because I acted vigorously and always retaliated upon them. When they blockaded France, I blockaded England, and I always made reprisals which they had not been accustomed to under the feeble government of the Bourbons, whom they used to insult at their pleasure. I told him that the English would hereafter repent of having prosecuted the war with so much hatred against me. If they had left me in France after my return to Elba, all Europe would have been quiet, France contented, no internal commotions nor hatred against the English for forcing on the nation a king whom they detested. The revolutionary spirit which exists now against the actual government of France may find its way to England, and if so, there is no knowing how it may terminate. I told him also, continued Napoleon, that I had been well pleased at the capture of Copenhagen, because it made bitter enemies of the Danes without injuring me, for it was not ships that I wanted, but naval officers and seamen who were all left behind to man my vessels. I also informed him that the capture and robbery of the Spanish frigate pleased me, as it caused you to be hated in Spain, where you might have been and were popular before, and besides was unworthy of a great nation. I told him that I did not receive money direct from Spain, that I got bills upon Vera Cruz, which certain agents sent by circuitous routes by Amsterdam, Hamburg, and other places to London, as I had no direct communication. The bills were discounted by merchants in London, to whom 10% and sometimes a premium was paid as their reward. Bills were then given by them upon different bankers in Europe for the greatest part of the amount, and the remainder in gold, which last was brought over to France by the smugglers. Even for the equipping of my last expedition, a great part of the money was raised in London. I asked if he meant that after his return from Elba. He replied, "Yes, that last expedition." I told the admiral, continued Napoleon, that you had been the first violators of the Peace of Amiens, that your ministers, who boast so much of not having acknowledged me as emperor, were so conscious of themselves of having been the violators of the treaty that they offered through Lord Whitworth to give 30 millions of francs and to assist as much as lay in their power to make me king of France if I would consent to the English retaining Malta. I took the liberty of asking to whom the proposal had been made. "To Malouet, who was minister to Louis a short time ago," replied the emperor. My answer to this offer was, "Tell Lord Whitworth that I will owe nothing to strangers or to their interference. If the French nation do not of themselves create me king, foreign influence shall never be employed by me to obtain it. The fact is that your ministers always deceive the people by false and artful representations, and are of the opinion expressed by the great Lord Chatham, that if England acted towards France with justice for 24 hours, she would be ruined. The admiral," continued Napoleon, "is very well informed about the history of the last years. is really an Englishman and sticks up for his country whenever he can, but notwithstanding, he could not contradict several of the assertions I made to him, because they were so incontrovertible. He returned frequently to the proposed interview with the ambassador, which he is most desirous should take place. I am convinced that no good would arise from it. I wish, added he, that he should know my sentiments on these matters. I remarked that perhaps his refusing to see the ambassador might be construed into an insult to the British government and to the nation which he represented. Napoleon replied, "It cannot admit of such a construction. He is not sent as an ambassador to St. Helena. He was ambassador to Emperor of China, and at St. Helena can only appear in his private capacity. Consequently, there is no necessity for his being introduced by the governor. If he wants to see me, let him go to Bertrand without being accompanied by any of the governor's people. Then we will see about it. However, I think it would be better for both that it should not take place, for if I receive him, I must put on an appearance of cheerfulness and clothe my face with smiles, as it is contrary to my custom to receive any person otherwise. Then I must either be obliged to make complaints to a stranger of the barbarous treatment I receive here, which is lessening to the dignity and character of a man like me, or else I must furnish an opportunity to this governor to fill the ambassador's head with lies, and to make him observe that I am so well treated, that I have made no complaints, that I want for nothing, that for me, on a tous les égards possibles, and enable him to write home a bulletin of falsehoods with an appeal to the ambassador and proof of the truth of them, so that it would place me in an awkward dilemma, and one which it would be better to avoid." He was very anxious in his inquiries about Captain Meynell, who was very dangerously ill. General Montauban much better. I showed him the Naval Chronicle, in which there was a long article about the death of Captain Wright. No person, said Napoleon, asserts positively that he had seen him murdered, and the principal evidence who testifies to the belief of it was a man who was himself in prison. Let him be asked for what crime he was thrown into a jail. It is not a place for honest people or for those whose testimony could be relied upon. If I had acted properly, I should have ordered Wright to be tried by a military commission as a spy and shot within 24 hours, which by the laws of war I was entitled to do. What would your ministers or even your parliament have done to a French captain that was discovered landing assassins in England to murder King George? If I had, in retaliation of the assassins sent to murder me, sent others to murder blank and the Bourbon princes, what would have been done to the captain of the vessel who had landed them in England if he were taken? They would not have been so lenient as I was with Wright. They would have had him tried and executed sur le champ. 7th, Napoleon very particular in inquiring about Captain Meynell, whose death he observed would grieve him, as he had there d'un brave homme. Had some more conversation with him relative to the prisoners made at the commencement of the war. I said that I believed he had demanded that the ships as well as the prisoners made in them should be given up in exchange for those detained in France. He replied that he did not recollect that he had demanded the ships. The only reason, added he, that your government would give as a right for detaining them as prisoners was that they had always done so in preceding wars, and that it would be lessening to the dignity of the government to give them up or to consider as prisoners of war those who had been detained by me in France. To this I answered that they had always done so because they had to deal with imbeciles and people who know not how to act vigorously, and were afraid to retaliate. As to the exchange of prisoners, I offered to effect it in the following manner, viz. To send 3,000 men consisting of 2,000 Spaniards and Portuguese and 1,000 English to a certain place there to be exchanged for 3,000 French, and so on until all were exchanged. Your government would not consent to this, but required that all English should be exchanged at first. though the others were your allies and were taken fighting by your side. As soon as the French prisoners in England heard of this proposal, they wrote over the strongest letters possible, protesting against and praying me not to consent to such terms, alleging that as soon as your ministers had got all the English prisoners, amounting, I believe, to 10,000, they would under some pretext break off the exchange. And that they, the French prisoners who were already treated badly enough, would then be subjected to every species of brutality and ill treatment, as the English would no longer be afraid of reprisals. What I most regret at it, and am most to blame for, is that during my reign I had not caused the English prisoners to be put on board of pontons and treated exactly as you treated mine in England. Indeed, I have given orders to have had it done, and to place them in ships in the Scheldt. De Craye, the Minister of Marine, though he hated you as much as any man could, opposed it on the ground of the expense and difficulty of effecting it and other reasons. There were numbers of reports also from your transport board testifying the good treatment which the prisoners enjoyed, which imposed upon me for a time. But as I found out from the prisoners themselves afterwards, they were filled with lies, like the reports that are sent from this island. I was also so much occupied with affairs of a much more important nature that I forgot it. I took the liberty of observing that I hoped he did not credit what he saw in Pierre's libel. No, replied Napoleon. I believe no exaggerated statement of the kind. I reason from the testimonies of the prisoners themselves and from the circumstances. In the first place, it was le comble du barbarie to put any prisoners, especially soldiers, in ships at all. Even sailors like to be on shore. I see that the admiral likes to live on shore, as well as every officer and seaman who can effect it. Man was born on shore. It was natural for him to like it. Your ministers said that they had not any fortresses to put them in. Then why not have exchanged or sent them to Scotland instead of massacring them in pontons? I am very sorry that I did not carry my intentions into execution, as in the event of a war 50 or 60 years hence between the two countries, it will be said. But even Napoleon suffered the English to put the French prisoners in pontons without having retaliated. My intentions were to have put the milords and the principal prisoners in pontons, and to have made them undergo precisely the same treatment as that practiced upon my prisoners in the prison ships in England. This would have had the desired effect and would have been beneficial to both parties. For the complaints of my lords, to which I would have allowed every publicity to be given, would have produced such an outcry, such a sensation among you English, who were egoists, by making you feel yourselves that which you inflicted upon others, that your oligarchy would have been obliged to remove the French prisoners from the pontons, which would have been followed by a similar step on my part. I would have left the canaille in the fortresses, as they, poor devils, had nothing to do with the measures of your ministers, who indeed cared but little what they suffered. I would not, continued Napoleon, desire a better testimonial in my favor than that of the prisoners of different nations who have been in France. Many of your English sailors did not want to be exchanged. They did not wish to be sent again on board of their floating prisons. The Russians declared that they were much better than in their own country after they discovered that their heads were not to be cut off, which they at first had been persuaded to believe, and the Austrians would not have escaped, even if allowed. I told the admiral, continued he, that I hoped